your host, Scott Garber, and today we're excited to bring on our next guest, Matilda Sung, to the show. Matilda, how you doing today?
Doing great, Scott. Thank you for having me.
Oh, Matilda, I am so excited to have you. You know, when I think about remarkable people, it's putting a footprint on society and leaving a legacy. And Matilda, we're going to unpack your story. I think you're doing that at every phase of the journey. But before we dive into the fun stuff and get to the pressing hot topics, let's get to know Matilda a little bit. So I know you're out there in the LA area. Take us back. Where did this whole journey start for you?
Yeah, it actually started up north in Canada, where I'm originally from.
Oh,
So I'll
wow.
disclose I'm Canadian. I am Canadian, and still Canadian citizen, but originally from Vancouver. Spent a good chunk of my life up there. My father was actually an oil executive, so we were fortunate actually to expatriate overseas. So I spent a good chunk of my high school year as an expatriate in Singapore, and then my family moved to Beijing and then Kazakhstan. And at that point, I'd actually gone to college, so I didn't have the lovely experience of living in Almaty or Beijing, but I did have Singapore there and sort of kind of set the runway for me to sort of live globally. So from there on, I did undergrad in Montreal at McGill. I worked in London after school in investment banking. Went to New York a few years later on the trading floor. Wanted to get into tech and start my own company, and that brought me over to the West Coast, so to the Bay Area, where I did business school and kind of tinkered with a bunch of different things. Realized that I wasn't exactly the best entrepreneur at that point in my life and kind of did the next best thing and joined a big, huge tech company. Spent some time with Amazon in their cloud division. And then I eventually earned my chops as a technical product manager building e-commerce products over at PayPal and eBay. And then at some point in my career, I had a chance to move down to Southern California. And due to my husband's career, and Southern California, that marked my path into management consulting, where I worked with a variety of different companies on digital transformations. It was during my time there through a client I'd served that put me in touch with the NFL. And that's where I spent 5 years of my career. And I'm happy to talk more about that. And somewhere down the road, I kind of realized I wanted to go back to working with tech, working with companies at the frontier of the innovation cycle. And that brought me into early stage investing with my family office and also with my current firm, Ludis. But I think that was a really long answer for you, but really to kind of paint the world for you, the different cities that I've been in and lived. And right now, I'm happy here in Southern California, in Manhattan Beach, actually, with my husband and my three young kids. Yeah, I have a
Now,
6, a 4, and a 18-month-old.
Now, you guys want to talk about something remarkable. I mean, everything that you just talked about, and we're going to unpack a couple stops on that journey, but talk to what this has been like being a highly productive executive while balancing three kids and then getting crammed into the house for the last 15 months. That to me is remarkable that you even have hair in your head still. What has that experience been like for you?
Well, first I'll say thank you. I mean, I have a couple white hairs now, if you can see, but
The light's doing a good job.
I think the world's been remarkable. It's not me, it's not you, it's not folks with kids, it's everybody to have gone through what we've gone through last year and to come out of it still smiling, still waking up, and still going on about our day to day is just purely remarkable.
Mm,
Now double click into that.
I hear a
I think
soundbite.
yeah, yeah. I think for those with a family, young, old children, even as children of old elderly parents, like we've all just grown new muscle, right? I think when this whole thing hit, I still remember distinctly watching Trump's address on TV March 13th, and I was like, holy shit, it's
Yep,
going down. It's going down.
it's going down.
And to have to rapidly adapt your household, your job, your day-to-day habits, your interactions with people. I mean, it was just rapid learning, right? And it was really a lesson and also an opportunity for us to apply all those lessons that we had in every part of our career that tells you you need to adapt to change. I was like, holy crap, here's the perfect opportunity, right? And so I think that's just been remarkable to see, not just with my own family, my spouse, my children, but the community around us, right? The teachers serving us, my colleagues that live internationally, just folks who are in various parts of their life. I have friends who are single and were actively dating, and their life changed 180%, right? So how do you adapt to it? But I think it overall, when I reflect back on it, just speaks to the strength of humanity, of
Mm.
humankind altogether, that we can withstand these types of shocks. And then we just come out of it stronger and with new muscle.
I love the fact that you talk about new muscle, right? Because oftentimes, when we were, when this thing just started, it was, I can't wait to make it great again, or I can't wait to go back. And I said, well, this is constantly evolving and changing. So greatness is never going back to something, right? It's always constantly developing new muscle and figuring out new ways to cultivate and bring that community together. And so I want to touch on your short stint, not short stint, your long stint in the NFL. It's longer than most players play in the NFL. Just fun little fact. But Matilda, this isn't the first time that you've had to flex and build new muscle. So talk to us a little bit about what that journey was like when you start to enter this behemoth that is very traditional, that you probably don't see a lot of diversity. There's not a lot of women that have a voice in it. What was that experience like at the onset when you landed the job and started to get your feet wet with the NFL?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I often get people asking me that, as a female with a lot of, very traditionally female interests, to work at an organization like the NFL, what is it like? And I'd say it's split. For me, prior to the NFL, I was working for a very well-known management consulting firm, McKinsey,
Yep.
and folks who work there come with a certain level of, respect and caliber and prestige. So you kind of walk into the room with that behind you already. But what I wasn't prepared for was the cultural aspects of things, the adjusting to the dynamics of an organization like the NFL. What I will say is, you'd be surprised. So I worked for the organization of the NFL, the business side of things. I wasn't part of the Players Association or anything to do on the athlete side, but mostly on the business side. And folks are quite well versed in the benefits and the importance of diversity, and importance of gender equality, all those things that we are now talking more about. I think where I was a little bit, I wouldn't say challenged, but where it was a little bit new for me is adapting myself in more predominantly male settings on topics that were predominantly owned by males in terms of how they talked about things. So, just to give a very specific example, one thing I had to get used to was the Mondays, the Tuesdays, and the Fridays when we have our early meetings and everybody's talking play by play about the game that happened last night. And I have my way of reading how the game went and what were good plays, what were bad plays, and what stuck out to me. And I noticed the way I spoke about the game wasn't always aligned with how the rest of the group spoke about it. So I think something like that definitely created some angst and anxiety for me in the beginning. And it wasn't just specific to me. I noticed it with other women too. And we saw all different ways in which the women would try to adjust. Like we can try talking like them, right? And segue in and have our comment, or we just don't say as much, right?
Mm.
And we just hope the meeting just starts and let's get on the agenda kind of thing, right? And I personally tried a bunch of everything. And it took a while for me to realize that, look, we're all fans and we're all can be fans differently. It probably took me a good solid year to earn my footing to say, I'm going to talk about the game like I understood the game last night. I may sound like a novice. I may not sound like a sportscaster. I may not sound like a sport pundit because I'm not.
Yep.
I'm not. I came to the game of the NFL in my early 20s. Okay. So, and I'm going to speak the way I understand it to be the type of fan that I am. And I think that's even more powerful because one of the things that we look at the league was how do we broaden fan base, right? It's not just catering to the affinities. Exactly. I
Yes.
see you pointing that finger, right? We talk about growing the market. That's talking to all types of fans, international fans, Hispanic, Latino fans, youth fans, female fans. They come to the game in many different ways, right? And if we aren't able to handle that dialogue from coming from different directions, then it's no different than we always say in the tech world. You can't build a company and build a product and expect people to come to you. You have to think about who it is that you're serving, what they want, and how they come to that product or how they come to that fandom themselves.
Mm.
So I kind of went on, on a bit there, but
No,
I did have to adjust a bit
this
in
is
certain
great.
cultural elements.
And I'm sure that set the tone for going into tech, which is a very bro culture, especially at the stage where you entered it. And I'm gonna, before we go down that path, I want to come back because my background's in the sports tech space, and so not only is that mentality cultivated at the top, but we start to see that come through the products, right? We start to see the user experience in a very traditional linear way, and so I'm curious. Are there any nuggets or sort of learning lessons that you took from your stint with the NFL that now have helped you transition into the sports tech space to really start to drive that more community driven and sort of the best things that sports can do for us as a society?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I should start out by saying that this is why I say in a lot of my meetings with our LPs and just the ecosystem at large is sports has the largest coverage in terms of like surface area. It covers like 50% of the world's population. What other things have that? Mobile phones, Google search, maybe
The internet.
Facebook, the internet, exactly, exactly. So therefore, we have to think about everybody, all the different archetypes, all the different demos, all the people that come to it. I was very fortunate when I joined the league. The fellow who was at leadership, Perkins, he had a very forward mindset, and he was looking to transition at least the Los Angeles division of the NFL into more of a tech savvy entity, if you will. You think about MLB, what they did with BAM, right? Taking some inspiration from there. So we had folks, we brought in a wide range of folks that had traditional Silicon Valley backgrounds. They weren't your folks that came from sports media, sports agencies, sports marketing backgrounds. So that was already quite revolutionary because what we found was in those meetings when we had folks like myself, Linda Tong's another one, she was a former CPO. There were a couple others that came from non-traditional sports backgrounds. The conversation changed. You brought up user experience, right? And and if you've been in sports for a really long time, that's great. And you're used to a certain way of looking at things, certain ways of looking at the fantasy game, let's say, for example, right? But when you bring fresh voices in and folks who don't necessarily come from sports, you get that new, like fresh blood in terms of how things can be and how things can be different because we draw learnings from the various companies we've worked from in the past, right? We've got folks who came from like dating companies from Silicon Valley or like traditional SaaS place companies. And I've worked with a number of wide ranging companies and we all bring that perspective in. And that's when you start having that diversity of thought in a room. We always talk about that. How does that even come to play? Well, it's having those people who come from those different experiences, voicing what those different experiences, and then having leadership okaying and saying, go try that out, go comp that out, go show us the wireframes for it. And then having that sponsor, that leader say, okay, this looks interesting. Now go test it out. Having that test culture, which is very prominent in Silicon Valley. You came from sports tech, so you have a bit of tech in you, and you know the importance of running a beta, a pilot, getting early user feedback. And that was a little foreign, I would say, to the league. It's like, I think traditionally when we're top down, it's like I have an idea at the top, and then I'm just going to trickle down, and that's the best thing. That's the best thing that we can launch, right?
Yeah.
Instead, we started having like a community, back to your reference to community, just people from different backgrounds coming together with this joint view of what this experience should be, and then testing it with the actual market before we go and build and launch it to market. So I think we saw that process and it was very, it was purposeful based on the people that we had hired at the league to get that kind of an outcome.
Wow. I mean, remarkable. That's all I have to say because this was sort of the, like, everyone's doing it now, or it's way more widespread now. But this was, you guys were going against the grain, right? Like, these were behemoths, and you guys were trying to move mountains with this mentality. And back to one of your points. So my wife is actually a product manager, and so you talk about this idea of trying things out. What's really interesting is it's almost counterintuitive to the society that we have cultivated, where it's this cancel culture, and like we got to really have this personification. All the growth happens in 2 week sprints if you're in a tech company. And we do it in 2 week sprints so that you can fail fast, fail often, fail early. So you're not making these mistakes when you go to market. And so, man, this is, I didn't know where the conversation was going, but I love that it's going down this lane, right? And so, we're going to come off the NFL a little bit because I want to touch about another nut that you're cracking, which is incredible, which is in this VC private equity world. I think it's a remarkable ecosystem that not a lot of people know about. So, Matilda, what is your perspective as a woman as you embarked on that venture? And before I ask that question, what was your perspective just as a business person? And then what was it like as a woman?
Sure, sure. So just to unpack that a little bit, my perspective on sort of the emerging early stage VC, PE space altogether, and then my perspective as a woman going into this.
Yeah.
I think it's an exciting, exciting place to be. I think in the last decade, I would argue that mainstream is the wrong word, but it's gotten much more attention. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that there's actually low barriers to entry. Of
Mhm.
course, you have to have the funds, and then if you keep going, you need the track record. So yes, there are some filtering that keeps it small. But in terms of access, like if anybody is really interested in investing in early stage companies and helping them grow through capital as well as support in non-capital forms, like it's accessible, it's out there. And I would argue that platforms like AngelList, Seed Invest, all these other, educational, democratized, accessible platforms has really disrupted the market and just made early stage investing that much more accessible, at least on an educational level, right? So
Mm.
I think that's really exciting because it opens up the funnel for the types of investors that companies can have. No longer are you restricted to just like your friends and family and then hope that you get VC money if you're going to go down that path. And we all know that VC money, there's tons of literature on that. And I probably don't even need to go into this, but just how small that funnel is and how selective is the wrong word, but how repetitive and redundant it is in terms of the types of people they fund, the types of things they fund over and over again. Right.
Good old boy network. Am I allowed to say
Exactly. Yeah.
that?
Say it one more time. Good old boys
Good
network.
old boy
Right.
network. I mean, listen, I play football in Alabama. Like, I mean, I'm familiar with the network, and it's a real thing, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
we all know about it, we joke about it, but that's definitely one of the things that's out there. So, not to digress down a weird rabbit hole, but couldn't let that go without saying that the good old boy.
No, and yeah, we should say it out loud. And I think we're at a time in American society where we can say that out loud. And I know being on the West Coast, it's becoming more of a thing that people are acknowledging that it happens. It still happens. And there are costs to doing that, meaning there are great companies that are left behind. There are entrepreneurs that are left behind. There's a chunk of the economy that we're missing and leaving on the table. It doesn't make
Mm.
sense, right? So I think as we say that, that we know that change is imminent. Like, and I hope to be part of that change. So kind of delving into sort of my lens as a female coming into this, like I am in this storm of change. I hope to be, right? I am not a male. I identify as female, right? So I'm on the other side of the equation there,
Yeah, yeah,
and I'm Chinese. I'm considered a minority, I suppose here,
yeah.
and I am the way I am. I don't really take the boxes for your traditional VC and like investee type, if you will. And I think it excites me to be part of this change. It excites me that there are founders who are like, wow, like I can work with someone like you who's a little different than some VCs who write a check and leave. Hey, you're gonna be there for us both in terms of helping us grow from an operating standpoint, but also be there for us personally. I think we're starting to see this era of like, I don't know what the right word is, but it's like almost touchy feely soft VC support, which I think it's so important because you're helping birth a baby, right? Like raising this child, this company. And there's so much that comes to it beyond just having the right business model, having the right, customers, having the right pipeline, the right talent, etc. It's a lot of the soft stuff that you have to go through because the hurdles are high and many early on in a startup's life, right? And that's where I think having your non-traditional old boys club folks come in can really add value, right? The other sides of the equation that's not traditionally been answered by existing VC offers. So I'm excited to be part of this shift, and I think obviously VC life, takes 7-10 years before you see anything. Hopefully, time cycles shorten depending on the industry you look at, and we can start to see some wins with the fact that we're broadening the funnel a little bit.
Ooh, that's an incredible answer. And before I go and put my 2 cents on it, I'm really curious. I've been toggling around with this idea. Shout out to Blaine Bartlett through Dave Meltzer's podcast, but compassionate capitalism, right? When I hear VCs, I think it's the bottom line. You're a number on a spreadsheet. This is how we make decisions. Is that how, are we seeing that soften up and really sort of get more holistic with the business owner? Or at the end of the day, is it brass tacks? If the numbers don't line up, we're not doing business together.
You know, I think I would not be authentic if I didn't say is a business. We're not a nonprofit, right? So at the end of the day, the numbers have to make sense. The opportunity has to make sense from an ROI, MOIC perspective, right? But I think what has shifted is people realize that checks one box, but there's a second box that needs to be checked, and you called it compassionate capitalism, right? We can define it in a variety of different ways. It's thinking about, well, how am I different than the other capital out there in terms of helping this founder and team, right? Maybe it's operating experience, maybe it's the soft support, leadership, mentorship, friendship that comes with it, right? And then, of course, there's a much talked about ESG component to a lot of investing these days, right? Thinking about whether the company at hand has a was it environmental, social, and governance, right?
Yep.
Impact. And look, being coming from the world of sports, like we said this just a few minutes ago, right? We hit 50% of the world's population. There is opportunity for tremendous impact,
Mm.
remarkable impact, right? And to be operating in this industry, it's we got to remember that, right? I think sometimes we get lost. It's like, oh, are they this cool technology for this sport? It's like we have the ability to affect change because the industry that we operate in, I think, has more of a reach in the Catholic Church, actually.
It
So
does.
I think it's pretty phenomenal if we just pause and think about that. Like everybody operating in sports tech, you and me, we have the ability to make massive change, massive impact.
And I'm going to replace the word ability with responsibility, because I think a lot of people enter into this space not really thinking about the holistic impact from the time someone puts on their cleats to the time you hang it up, and then the viewing experience, right? And I look at sports as this parallel to what's going on in society. And it seems pretty one to one, or at least one to two, right? It's pretty close. And there's no surprises with where we're at as a country. If you look at the way our sports ecosystem set up, it's very selfish, it's hyper individualized, it's driven by the bottom line. And it's neat to see coming the paradigm shift to say, hey, the pendulum swung to one side, and we realized that there was a business, but now COVID's opening that door to say, hey, that's not what it's all about, right? So, Matilda, I'm going to swing a really random question to you, but it's always been top of mind. As you go to work day to day, how do you define success with where you sit right now?
That's a great question. I think success for me is going to be defined in the impact and legacy that I have.
I love that. And
And
so, oh,
impact is a big. Go ahead. Oh, sorry, you froze for a second. Uh, going to
take
say,
take two.
well, I meant to, so we could kind of let that sink in a bit. Impact and legacy, right? Um, I was a former consultant, so I'd be remiss if I didn't say impact. But I think there's really something there. It's it's can you affect change, right? Can you meaningfully change the way people think about something, the way people do something, the way people behave, their habits? Like that's a big deal, right? And obviously in the context for something better, right?
Yep.
um, right. We want them to do better, and I think that sits on top. And then the legacy part is will people remember what you did because you were able to make that impact? And I think a lot about my kids actually, and being a role model for them. And I don't know if they're going to be in sports stack, if they're going to be in business, anything, but it's, will you always remember to wake up every day and know that your goal is to affect change in a positive light, right? And that applies. You could be a doctor, you could be a teacher, you could be anything, and it applies. So I think that to me would be success, and I measure it on a daily basis, hourly basis, annual basis, whichever.
We're growing, right? and
Yeah.
and that's evolving, that's changing. And it's funny, it's something that I toggle with. I ask a lot of people, and you get a wide smattering of answers, some on the monetary side, some on the impact side. And I've landed at this: the ability to reach one and teach one, right?
Mm,
Because you have to stay in the game, you have to be relevant, but then you're rising all the boats in the harbor, right? They come up with the tide. And so we're going to go ahead and sort of shift now, because you have your hands, through this VC lens, and a lot of different really innovative technologies. like let's dive into that. Like the impact that you're seeing come down the pipe in the sports world. What can we get excited about? What do you have your hands in? Let's get a peek into that.
So many things. Again, I would be remiss if I didn't talk top of mind right now. The whole craze on NFTs. Everybody's going crazy over it,
What's
right?
going on with it? Like, let's just first of all, I mean, I saw Bryson DeChambeau come out with one, LeBron selling dunks for $2 million. Like, Matilda,
Yeah.
what are your take on the NFTs?
Yeah, my take is that the technology is right, the provider who provide that technology is there, and then the consumer is ready to consume that. So, and when I think of like when people ask me trends, like what's hot, I look at the confluence of those three variables. And I think in the context of NFTs, those three pieces are in play, right? The technology to have a really cool highlight be put in digital. I think of NBA Top Shots, right? I don't know if you have
Yeah,
a
of course.
collectible moment. I have mine, and it kind of swivels, and I see, I see the player go make a dunk, and like, whoo, that's my collectible moment of like 8 different camera angles, each about 4 seconds of play there, right? The technology is there to make it in a really slick format, and to access it. The provider, we've got a company is made Top Shots, Dapper Labs, that were able to deliver on it, and then you've got consumers that are comfortable purchasing something online that lives digitally on a platform that they don't necessarily own, right? Those three things came together, and boom, you have this craze that's happening not just with NBA Top Shots, but with other companies like Chili's. Chili's is one of our portfolio companies. Are you familiar with them?
I'm not. No.
Amazing. They've done a lot of work with the major European football clubs and now making their way into the US. They basically allow these clubs to earn a different revenue stream through launching digital tokens. So AC Milan last month raised $6 million in 30 minutes selling AC Milan tokens to their fans. And what do these tokens allow you to do? It allows you to vote on the team colors in the locker room, vote on the champion song, in some places actually you can get into sort of like the play makeup for a particular game, though those probably cost a lot of coins.
Yeah.
But it allows, it's basically a fan engagement and loyalty play, right? But what we've seen is we talk about new exciting markets. Not only is it catering to the fans of that sport and that team, you're actually seeing a lot of non-fans come on board, which is exciting. I know at first people might be like, oh, we don't want those guys who are, speculative people or collectibles people, but actually they help grow the market. I was on a community call with the NBA Top Shots female group, and I think they have 5 people speak. Okay. Only one of the 5 was an actual NBA fan. That's because she was a reporter, a sidelines reporter. The other 4 were a collection of collectible enthusiasts, blockchain enthusiasts, crypto enthusiasts, that eventually, when they were asked, like, what's your strategy for buying the particular moments and cards, they started getting to, well, he was a rookie and I've been watching him. They sounded like fans. And so to me, that was like an aha moment. It's like, wow, you've got something like this where the market's ready with the technology, caters to your core group of fans, but you're also attracting net new market, white space market. Very interesting and exciting. I see the same thing about esports. Um, Esports, part of our thesis at Ludis is really looking at these markets that have a sports core, but have an ability to tackle net new white space. Because that becomes very interesting, right? Sports is 50%. Now let's try to get the other 50% there. And esports is really it's that their growth trajectory really demonstrating that. And people are surprised to know there's actually not a huge overlap between traditional sports fans and esports fans.
Nope.
So it's actually very interesting to see that whole ecosystem develop. What I'm also excited about is the utility plays that's allowing the ecosystem to stand itself up. So they're like esports teams and leagues that are needing the things that a regular sports team would need. So think about like on-site sports therapists, psychologists, like agents, creator platforms. So I'm seeing all that crop up, and I'm really excited because it's an underserved space, and there's a lot of growth in the youth market for it. So I think that having those right utility plays in place will really help that ecosystem flourish. So I said a bunch of things, but I think like NFTs, blockchain, esports. I didn't talk about sports betting as much, but of course, if you are into sports betting, you're actively watching to see which states turn on in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yep.
we're continue to be bullish on it. We know the states need to figure a way to make money. So
It's I mean, and the games are changing, right? Between, I mean, fantasy kicked it off. Now betting, like, I mean, we're watching the game through different lens, or
yeah,
a different lens, which is really exciting. And as a little more traditionalist, it's scary, right? Like you have to have this level of confidence to say, like, hey, I'm okay with selling NFT tokens to fan controlled football, and now someone else is calling the plays, right? It changes the whole dynamic as a sport, as a participant and a fan. But
yeah,
nonetheless, like, embrace it because it's here, it's not going anywhere. Now,
mm,
one thing that I would be remiss, because I'm intimately in this space, is around NIL. It's really exploding. It's a new market, emerging market of new potential. Matilda, my pointed question to you is, how do we make sure we don't make the same mistakes that maybe we see in the NFL on not making sure, on the education side, on the mental health side? Do you guys have these conversations as a VC, as we're going to now be putting this in, the hands of college athletes?
yeah, absolutely. I think education is paramount to everything. I mean, technology especially so. And the thing with technology is outside of sports tech, regulation education traditionally lags, right? Developments in technology. Who carries the torch? If you just look at what happened last year during the pandemic when Microsoft, Facebook, Zuckerberg, they had to go to the Hill and testify on, privacy issues and various issues, antitrust issues. Let's get ahead of the game, right? Like I think there's an opportunity, myself from the VC world, but other folks from the ecosystem, whether you're a media player, you're a rights holder, you're an athlete. Like, how can we increase knowledge in this space? I think about Robinhood too. So I'm an investor in Robinhood, and
Ooh, we could do a
yeah,
whole episode on that.
oh, we can, yeah, yeah, and education, I think, could have solved a lot of that stuff, if you will. I'm just gonna blanket say stuff, but education, I think you hit the nail on the head, Scott. Like, is there a responsibility? Absolutely, and we all play a part in that, and it's about creating that literacy. It's not financial literacy. It's literacy in these new technologies. And how are you the appropriate person to own an NFT? Are you an appropriate person to have a crypto wallet? Right? Do you have enough consent from your parents? At what age is consent appropriate? Right? So I think those are all questions that shouldn't sit at the Capitol Hill level. We should have these conversations here. I know across my partners and I, we talk about these things, and I think we haven't done enough. We haven't done enough. So I thank you for reminding us. And, so it could be as simple as just doing this kind of an interview with you
That's
and
it.
bringing these topics up. Yeah.
It's just talking about it, right?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, what social media, for the good, the bad, the ugly, it's given us a platform to have and host these conversations. And nothing that we talk about here today is prescriptive, or is law, but it's a perspective. And, I mean, Matilda, you traveling the world and gaining this perspective as a young lady, and then, migrating that into business. Who are we not to listen to, right? Not that it's right or wrong, but you bring remarkable perspective to the table. And I think that we're at a point as humans where we can all be a little more open minded. And so, I mean, man, I could sit here and talk to you for hours. I think we're going to have to get back on, but I'd be remiss one more time, because our good buddy Nathan Kaufman brought us together in this forum. So we talk so much about the experience from the tech side. Talk to me about the exciting things as we're going to be re-entering back into society. You have your hands on the Tended Bar venture. How's that going for you?
Oh, it's great. I can't think of a better time for Tenant Bar to come to market than right now. We always often talk about COVID being COVID headwinds and tailwinds. For Tenant Bar, and I wish Justin and Jay were with me and Nathan too, they'll say, "Oh yeah, there were tons of headwinds. There was no live games." So for the audience sake, Tenant Bar is an incredible automated machine that dispenses mixed drinks and beverages, alcoholic beverages, in a stadium or a stadium festival setting, right? It's a self-functioning robot, if you will, and they did it with such ease and such precision and such like speed that there's cost savings. And there's also now, when I talk about COVID tailwinds, there's a huge health focus now, health and sanitary focus, and having a machine like Tenant Bar in a live event where it's able to clean itself. There's no interaction with anybody. right? Payments is super slick. The line management is managed so that you're not in line like neck to neck, shoulder to shoulder with like 50 other people. Like it's going to completely change and disrupt that experience of as we come back to live games. So Tenant Bar to me represents a number of new innovations that are going to come to market even faster because we came out of COVID, because we need to have safety measures in place, because we still like to drink while we watch a game, right?
Maybe more.
Maybe more so now, right? Just safely. So I'm extremely excited. And I think you get into smart stadium, they fall into that category of smart stadium. How do you think about ingress, egress when you go to a game? How do you think about parking, food, beverage, merch, ticketing, fan activations? And a lot of it is going to be, activated through, we have a remote control in our hands. It's the phone.
Yep.
Right. It's the phone for now. Who knows what it'll be next in 10 years. Right. But it's a phone and it's going to be incredibly powerful in creating that seamless, streamlined experience that feels safe, which I think is going to be a key. It is a key performance metric this year as we go back to
100%. 100%. And that's just it, right? Like, not only is there the physical side we have to worry about, which, I mean, when we just talk about hard cost, right? Like, I mean, how much liquor is wasted throughout the course of a game? That's a really, I don't know that, but I'm sure it's a ton. So to be able to go ahead and mitigate that while providing the psychology side of things where you feel safer. I'm almost more bullish in saying that the psychological hurdle is going to be harder to get over than maybe the physical hurdle of COVID. But
yeah.
who am I'm not a doctor. Don't listen to me. Don't take it at face value, right? And so, Matilda, what an incredible just representation of the Remarkable Show. You're a remarkable person. You tell remarkable stories, and more importantly, you're really carving out a legacy and making a remarkable impact. If any of the listeners want to get behind what you're doing in your fund, or continue conversations with you, can they find you on social, or where's the best place to get you?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. You can find me there. My email is matilda@ludis.capital, which is also available on LinkedIn. So hit me up, shoot me an email, drop me a note. I'll be certain to reply.
Awesome. Well, from myself, from the Remarkable team, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for the work that you're doing in the society and in the community. And all you listeners, just remember, we are going to be bringing on remarkable people, telling remarkable stories, making remarkable impact. You guys stay safe out there, and we'll catch you next time.